everybody. Today we're going to be talking about 5 and 6 string basses and why you may or may not need them. So also going to be dispelling and confirming myths about 5 and 6 string basses that you heard. So let's get it started. Yes, Jacko only did need 4. Marcus Miller only needs 4. Geddy Lee only needs 4. Any bass player you can think of, Steve Harris of Iron Maiden, also only needs 4 strings. So not a lot of the great bass players in pop, jazz, rock really need more than 4 strings, and that's true because they're who they are and they're great. But in truth, here's a myth: you only really do need 4 strings. I mean, it's weird to say that considering the fact that I'm holding a 5-string bass right here. Sorry, 5-string bass right here. But yes, you only really need 4 strings. As far as beginning bass, like starting to play a bass, you don't need any more than that, honestly, because if my calculation is correct, the 4-string reaches 4 octaves bass notes. Most rock, pop, jazz songs get notes from those registers only. You don't need to go above or below that, because anything that's like above that in terms of register is already like the lowest notes of your guitar, you know. So you really don't need that much. It's like only a little bit of there's only a little bit of difference between the highest bass notes that you can get in a 6-string bass to the lowest guitar notes that you can get on your guitar. There's like just a small thing. So if you want to separate your bass from your guitar, 4 strings is really what you need, because there's a space between the lowest notes of a guitar and the highest notes of a 4-string bass. Yeah, and so most songs, unless you're playing something uber complicated, you don't really need anything more than 4 strings. Yes, correct. If you did the math, which is very easy to do, there are more notes in a 5-string and a 6-string. But take for example Ariel here, this my beautiful lady right here, who is a 5-string bass with 22 frets. So when you have 22 frets plus the open notes, that's 23 notes per string times 5. That's 115. And you take away 23 for 4-string version. If you take out the B, if this is a 4-string and also have 22 frets, you take out 23 notes, which makes it 92. Wouldn't that make it? Let me make it 92, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. It would be 92 notes. But let's go back to the 5-string. 100 of those 115 notes. How many of those notes are the same note in different positions? That we can count. You don't get a lot of unique notes into it. In fact, a 5-string bass only really has 5 unique notes more than a 4-string bass. And those notes are low B, low C, low C sharp, low D, and low D sharp. Anything from here onwards can be found in a 4-string bass. So a 6-string, on the other hand, has 10 unique notes more than a 4-string. And those unique notes are comprised of the 5 that are unique to the 5-string, which are the lowest notes, which are the low B, C, C sharp, D sharp, D sharp, and anything from this fret onwards can be found in this fret onward on the B string can be found in the 4-string. The other 5 notes are on the other side of it all. So this is if this was a 4-string, the highest note would be a high G, which is the 24th fret of the G string. which on the high C string would be on the 19th fret. So anything from the 20th fret onwards, you cannot find in a 4 string. So these are the other 5 notes that you can't find on a 4 string. That's G sharp, A sharp, B, and C. Now these 5 notes are very close to the lowest notes of a guitar. How close? I can't be exactly sure, but I know it's very close. It's very close. Now this is weird because we're comparing basses here, and the 5 string I used had 22 frets and 5 strings, and this had 24 frets and 6 strings. But the 5 unique notes and the 10 unique notes thing is when you're comparing basses of the same model, I guess. A 5 string with 24 frets has 5 more notes, unique notes, than a 4 string that has 24 frets, and a 6 string of 24 frets has 10 more unique notes than a 4 string that has 24 frets. Again, the Stingray that I use for the 5 string has got 22 frets. It's a different calculation, but if we were going to be comparing it with other 22 fretboard basses, that Stingray would still have 5 more notes that a 22 fret Stingray 4 string would have. And well, they don't really have a 22 fret Stingray 6 string, but if we had a 22 fret 6 string, same thing. So only we'll have 10 more notes than the 22 fret 4 string. You know, so that's something that you have to be wary about. Again, those low notes, those high notes over here, very close to the guitar. So why a 5 string? A 5 string, well, simple. If you need to get to those low notes, like really low, like lower than a 4 string can give you, like you're into like metal, death metal or whatever, like really dark metal, you go there. That's where you go for 4 string stuff. That's where you go for the 5 string, is when you reach the lowest notes, like lower than you can get from a 4 string. Otherwise, everything can be attained in 4 string. Like I said, there are a lot of really well-known metal bass players. Off the top of my mind, I couldn't name them all, but it always comes back to Steve Harris. He's never played, I don't think he's ever played a 5 string bass in his life. So, do you need a 5 string bass to do metal? Well, not if you need to hit like really low notes. Good. So why 6 string? Well, if you're like a prog guy, or you do something like really avant-garde, like jazz type, or you're like a soloist, you need as much as the high notes as you possibly can. Anything from here to here, like right there, because it's really difficult to do bass solos from up here, because it's not as easy on the ears of a listener. That's why you need the extra high notes. That's, you know, I guess that's the only reason why 6 strings should be a thing, is for people who play solos and, you know, like really complicated music, you know, not necessarily metal, but I think you can probably use it for metal too, if ever. Some people do use it for metal. I think John Myung always uses a 6 string bass, but again, he's a prog metal guy, so, you know. The other thing about 6 strings for me is that when you're playing a piece wherein, for example, you're playing here, and then you have to go here, and then like you have to go shift all the way down the neck to some lower register, like maybe even like here on the 12th fret. Like for example, you're on this string here, and then you go to the then you go to the you're like on B flat. Then you go to C. And all of a sudden you have to go to like a low G. Like you go and then slide and then slide. But you really don't want to do the slide because you have to go back up. You have to go to the low notes again really quickly. Instead of instead of doing the slide and then if the slide effect isn't really needed to be done, if you just need to if you're just doing that, you can just play their low G here. So it's a lot closer. But of course, if you have to slide, then that's unavoidable. The slide is part of the song. But if you're playing multiple notes and then you have to shift from one side of the fretboard to the other side of the fretboard, it would be nice to have a wider and a higher string below your highest string, so that instead of going all the way down to where the body is, you just have to go down. Makes it easier to play by just going to the next string below. You're just not having to stretch your hand all that much. That's one way of playing with a 6-string bass that can affect everybody. It's also good for scales. You can play more scales. You can go 2 octaves. You can go play. You can start your scale up on the low B and end it all the way down here. You could probably complete like two whole octaves, or a little more than two whole octaves, really. 3 if you keep going down the fretboard on the lowest C string. That will make it easy. Again, so if you have to play consecutive notes that are far away from each other, you don't have to stretch too far. That's another reason, that's one thing. And yeah, that's the reason why. And of course, so again, recapping why you need 6-string is if you're a bass soloist, or you play very complex prog stuff, or complex metal stuff, and you need those notes. Those are the reasons. And also, it's nice if you have to play notes that are far apart, you don't have to stretch your hands too far, or you don't have to go too far on the neck, because there's always like a high note on the string below the string that you're playing. Unless of course you're playing it on the C string, which is probably never the case. So that's sort of why 6 strings are cool. Should I use a 5-string and a 6-string to learn? No, you should not. That's probably a bad idea, unless you really need to buy a 5-string or a 6-string. You don't really need it. Again, there's only a handful. It's only a handful of notes that are different. There are only a handful of unique new notes that a 6-string, the 4-string can't give you. That's on a 6-string, and even less on a 5-string. I recommend mastering the fretboard of the 4-string first before moving on to 5 or 6. Because you say, "Oh, I'm gonna play Dream Theater songs." It's like no beginner is gonna start playing Dream Theater songs right off the bat. You don't need to buy a 6-string bass. I mean, but if that's your goal, if your goal is to, but I don't see any reason why, if your goal is to be a 6-string bass player, why you shouldn't start with a 6-string, to be honest. But if your goal is just to be a bass player or to play in a band, and your music is just, 90% of the music that you hear on the radio or wherever, you don't need more than 4 strings. Hey guys, just wanted to clarify that last thing. If you're gonna play mainstream music that is not that complicated and is even bordering on very simple, you don't need anything more than 4 strings. However, if you feel that there's going to be a time in your life when you're going to need a larger canvas in which to explore your creativity, when you're a very good bass player, that's when you opt for the 5 or 6 string basses. On the other hand, if your goal was to become a progressive rock bass player or a bass soloist, then I see no reason why you can't start learning with a 6-string. It's like what the thing about guitar is. When people ask, "Oh, should I learn how to play acoustic first and move to electric?" The answer is simple: is if you're plan was to play electric all this time, just learn with an electric. If your plan was to be an acoustic guitar player, learn with an acoustic. It's the same thing. If your plan was just to become a John Myung type, start with a 6-string. Sure, it's a bit harder to learn as a beginner, but once you figure it out, I think you're going to be okay. To each his own, you know. But again, you know, however,